there she is. Interested to know if anybody doesn't have an American lady, but maybe you can let us know later in the chat. Feel free to say hello in the chat and say where you're from if you want to. We won't read it out, but nice for everybody else who's on the call. Because we're recording, we'll do the questions in the chat. So we'll do some, you're going to hear from 3 or 4 speakers, and then we will do some Q&A. So if you're like me, you have a stream of consciousness thing, so feel free to jot the questions down as people are speaking. We'll take all of the questions together when all of the speakers have finished. I'm pretty sure that is it. Oh, I need to tell you that if you're, I think I was going to tell you about if your camera stops working, turn it off and turn it on again, but I'm sure everyone knows that by now. So that is it for boring housekeeping. So look, we at Housing Justice have been, in fact, actually, about 9 or 10 months ago, my mother-in-law said to me, I really think Housing Justice should be doing something about, should be talking to churches about the numbers of refugees and asylum seekers we're seeing in she leads a church in the East End. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I spoke to a couple of other churches over the course of the next 6 months, and like a fool, I didn't listen to my mother-in-law. And then we got to the winter, or to the autumn really, and we obviously have seen lots of churches become really involved in work to support refugees and asylum seekers, particularly actually people leaving home office accommodation. There's lots of churches who've got home office hotels near them, or people who are staying in home office hotels using the church. And so it's become a bigger issue as the year has gone on, and an advert to listen to your respective mothers-in-law. But we should. So what we wanted to do really is we wanted to put together something which is primarily, I suppose, aimed at churches and community groups who are, not the professionalised homelessness sector, but are seeing this in your congregations, in your community work, and want to do something about it. And there's each speaker is going to share a slightly different perspective, and we'll set the context up properly. So what we thought would be useful would be to hear from some people who are working with churches on the ground and have been kind of developing that kind of community, faith and community response on the ground, to hear from that perspective what that's looking like and how that's shaping up. So we've got Patty from Compassionate Communities to speak from that perspective. Then we've got, then we thought it'd be right to have some a kind of expert's view really on the quite technical and often quite complicated position around the regulation and legislation which kind of governs this area, and particularly when we're talking about home office evictions. We thought Bethan from Praxis, who are an immigration advice provider amongst other things, and Leon from Naccom, who are a charity working with lots of other charities who provide emergency accommodation to asylum seekers and refugees, would be really good to hear from them to talk about, like, I suppose, the overarching context and the kind of policy landscape. And then, because it's our party, we thought that we would get Jenna from Housing Justice to speak, and I suppose we wanted to come at this from a slightly more hopeful and optimistic place, which frankly is difficult to be when you're talking about asylum and immigration policy in the UK at the moment. So we wanted to focus on 2 projects we've developed to act as a solution for some people who are leaving home office accommodation and more generally refugees and asylum seekers. That is our lodgings project, and our which is new and launching this month, and our existing hosting projects. So hopefully you're going to get a feel for basically how bad things are, and what people are doing about it, and how things might develop over the next few months, and a view to kind of what you might do, and people, what you and your community groups and church groups might do to support some folks who are in a very difficult position. So I hope that's what you're expecting. There's going to be opportunity to ask questions, and that is it from me. And I'll hand over to Patty, and I'll see you for the questions in a little while.
Brilliant, thanks, Jacob. So just to introduce myself, so I'm Patty Gerke. I am a development worker in the Diocese of London, and I support churches and chaplaincies, amongst a few other things, in their work with refugees and asylum seekers. So I'm going to share a bit of the experiences of some of our church communities in relation to the increase in homelessness amongst refugees that we've been seeing. I'm going to share a little bit of the work that we've been trying to do to amplify the voices of those refugees affected. I'm going to focus less on the practical support, which I think other speakers are going to cover, in my understanding. Otherwise, I can touch on that at the end of the Q&A. So just in terms of general context, so many of our church communities, like many of you, I'm sure, and many other community organisations, faith groups, charities, have been working with people waiting to hear about their asylum claim. These people have often been waiting months or years, in many cases, in Home Office accommodation. And during that time, our churches offer practical or emotional or spiritual support. Since probably for mid kind of September last year, we started to hear through our church communities of an increasing number of individuals who were hearing decisions on their asylum claims. Now, that kind of moment of receiving a positive decision should be a moment of joy and the start of a new life in the UK, or the prospect of that. But we also started to hear about an increasing number of refugees receiving their leave to remain and then facing either the prospect or the reality of homelessness. Now, I think probably others far more skilled than I will unpack more the policy context, but just very briefly, so the practice, Home Office practice before August was that following a decision on someone's asylum claim and a granting of their leave to remain, they were given 28 days notice that their support would be ending. And that commenced from the date of their biometric residence permit, or BRP, being issued. However, we were seeing individuals receiving, in some cases, 7 days notice or less to leave their accommodation. And the Home Office have kind of since said that this 28 days notice was temporarily suspended during August, when they used the date of the asylum decision, that earlier date, rather than the date of issuing the BRP. So what we did in terms of, we started to, probably October time, join other organisations in speaking out about the increase in homelessness. We published first a blog, and we tried to share some of the experiences of refugees who were attending a weekly drop-in at King's Cross Church. And one of the stories we shared there was a Syrian man who arrived at that drop-in in great distress because whilst he received a positive decision on his asylum claim, when he received his letter stating his eviction date, he then had just 4 days to leave his accommodation. And the letter also stated that he'd received his BRP, so his biometric residence permit, but he was pretty desperate because he hadn't received it. And at that point, without his BRP, he was finding that he couldn't access any support. And the contingency hostel that he was staying in had threatened to call the police if he stayed there. Church, in terms of church communities experience, already at that point, they were finding that many of the organisations, refugee and homelessness support organisations that they would usually signpost people to, were becoming increasingly stretched and either had really long waiting lists or were closed for referrals. So I think it's reasonable to say, on behalf of certainly the church communities that I've been journeying alongside, it's been a really hard season. Particularly witnessing this huge increase in needs, often where those needs can't be met and they've not been able to find places to refer people to. So we kind of continued to try and share the experiences of our church communities. And I think, Emma, we've got a little film that we made, this film with one of our West London churches who have a local community project who support refugees and asylum seekers that they have hosted for a couple of years now. So thanks, Emma, if you could share that.
Perfect. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
UK as Storm Ciarán batters parts of southern England and the Channel Islands. It's brought heavy rain and wind gusts of more than 100 miles an hour.
I'm scared. I don't have any place to live, and I don't have pay slip for rent house. I don't have any money to rent house.
So when people get their status, they are incredibly excited. They're going to be independent, they're going to be able to earn. And then if they get an eviction letter just a week after that, and they get 7 days to move out, of course they're terrified. We see people who are shaking with fright at the thought that in a couple of days they're going to be sleeping in a doorway or sleeping under the bridge.
مضمون الرسالة أنه يجب علي إخلال الغرفة في غضون 7 أيام فقط. صدمت الحقيقة، انصدمت من الموقف اللي صار، يعني من الرسالة اللي شفتها، واحترت شو بدي أساوي. ما عندي حلول، يعني ما عندي حلول. وأنا يعني ما أنا مرتبط لا بعمل ولا مرتبط بشيء. الأمر صعب علي جدا، وأجواء بريطانيا، أجواء لندن تحديدا كلها أمطار وبرد، يعني موقف صعب جدا. يعني تخيلت هذا الموقف إني أنام بالشارع، يعني موقف لا أحسد عليه.
This is the EASE project, which the church hosts. EASE is a separate charity now. Hopefully they found a welcome, a warm, dry place for a cup of tea, cup of coffee, a chat. And then there's a little food bank that runs, and we serve a meal. There's English lessons, support for those with young children, and then also helping people as much as we can signpost them to where they might need a little bit of help with something. I think the cross-cultural, cross-faith and no faith of EASE offers a richness, and I think it gives an example of what Britain's like in terms of the multiculturalism, and also we'll all share the same desire to give a warm welcome.
I became a host rather unexpectedly. One of my students was being evicted, and I could see the anxiety and the concern. When I see our guests turn up and realise they only have 2, if they're lucky, 3 weeks before they have to find somewhere to live, it breaks my heart. They've worked so hard to get their English to a level. They desperately want to integrate, but they find it impossible to find somewhere to rent. Anywhere they look at privately, they need 6 months employment history. Anywhere they look to work, they want a permanent address. If they then become street homeless, it's so difficult to recover from that.
If I didn't find a family, I would be homeless.
المستقبل بالنسبة لي أراه ظلام، ضباب، لا أرى شيء، يعني ضباب، لا أعرف.
What we'd like the government to do now is to show some humanity. We would say it needs to be at least 28 days, which is what it used to be, and even longer if possible, which gives you a fighting chance of finding somewhere to live and not being on the street.
Thanks, Emma. So I just wanted to show that because it also it shows people's stories in their own words rather than me. I could tell you lots of case studies, but it shares their own stories in their words. So off the back of that then, so this was all kind of then before Christmas, we coordinated a letter that we sent to the then Minister for Illegal Migration. That role changed 3 times during the period we were drafting it, but it went to him in the end and the Faith Minister. So that was from the Bishop of London, and it was co-signed by 46 faith and belief leaders across London. And alongside requests, the letter expressed our deep concern for the welfare of those who, despite being granted their refugee status, were finding themselves homeless. Bishop Sarah then raised a question in the House of Lords, so that was back on the 18th of December, and asked how the Home Office were monitoring and upholding their kind of stated practice of providing this 28 days notice from the receipt of someone's biometric residence permit. And I mean, you can watch the debate, it's a good one to watch. The Home Office Minister in the Lords said that as far as he knew, the system was working well. However, when pushed, said that he would look into cases where we had evidence that that wasn't happening. So we, off the back of that, have requested a follow-up meeting with the Home Office to try to share some of the case studies that we have of kind of individual cases. We're waiting for their reply at the moment on that meeting. So just to bring us up to date, so at the moment we're continuing to listen to the experiences of our churches on the ground and the refugees known to them to see whether this practice that they are now suggesting is happening has changed back to this 28 days from the receipt of someone's BRP. Although even with that change, people may still receive really short notice to leave their accommodation. And alongside other refugee organisations, we would like to see a notice period that is far more reflective of the time that it actually takes for newly recognised refugees to access housing, employment and benefits. And we'd put that also in the letter that the different faith and belief leaders signed. So that's in a real nutshell some of our experience since September, and I'm really happy to answer any questions later or for people to contact me after the session if that would be helpful. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you, Patty. So we are now going to hear from Bethan, I think. And Bethan and Leon, are you both going at the same time? Are you going to, or is Bethan going to hand over in
I think it's probably better if Leon goes first because he's going to do more of the policy context and I'm going to do a little bit more about practical steps. I think Leon would fit better first. Yes, Leon?
Yeah, I must admit, I do.
Leon, can I leave you? Can you just seamlessly hand over to Bethan without without me having to intrude in?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I must admit, I do talk a lot about the network. I do also touch on the policy context, but I think that powerful video definitely did a better job than I can in terms of talking about some of the main issues that we're seeing. But thanks for having me. I do have some really basic slides, which I might pull up, just so you're not looking at my face. So do give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Can you see that okay? Brilliant. Yep, so I'm Leon Elliott, and I work for Naccom, the No Accommodation Network. I'm going to talk a bit about refugee homelessness, obviously, and why we're seeing so much of it right now. Then I'm going to focus on how voluntary services like those within our network are responding to this challenge, and in turn, what people like you on the call can do to support those that are facing homelessness. So to set the scene, I'll talk a little bit about the role that charities play in meeting the housing needs of people leaving the asylum system. So the No Accommodation Network, we're a membership body representing around 135 services across the UK, all working to end homelessness amongst refugees, asylum seekers and other migrants. And around half of our members provide housing support for people facing homelessness and destitution. The main ways in doing that are through hosting schemes, housing and property schemes, and then emergency accommodation like shelters. And then the other half of our membership will deliver other types of support to people facing homelessness. And that might be advice, drop-ins, welfare support, or financial payments. So in 2022-2023, collectively, the network supported over 3,700 people. And members also provided financial support to over 3,800 people experiencing destitution and homelessness. We've got a really diverse network that deliver a wide range of accommodation services, all aimed at different client groups. But as you can see there, the most commonly supported group last year was refugees. So that's people obviously that have been through the asylum system and have received their positive decision. So by summer 2023, which is when we conducted the survey, we already had the most ever refugees supported by the network, which was up 50% from the previous year. And we know anecdotally from members that the number is now likely much higher than that due to the policy changes already touched on that we saw towards the end of last year. So, as I mentioned, we've seen a huge increase in the number of refugees becoming homeless and approaching our members for support. And I think there is a fairly simple explanation for this. So, as the government made its push to clear the backlog towards the end of the year, as it promised to do so earlier in the year, we saw a huge increase in the number of people getting decisions on their asylum claims. So to put the numbers into perspective, there were more than 110,000 initial decisions made on asylum cases in 2023, compared to just 30,000 in 2022, so nearly 4 times as many. In turn, we saw an unprecedented increase in the number of people that were being forced to leave their Home Office accommodation. And there's various reasons why refugees face such a high risk of homelessness at that point of leaving the system. As I mentioned, the film did a really good job in talking about those reasons. One of them, obviously, is something that affects everyone, and that's the ongoing housing crisis, the lack of affordable private rented accommodation, the lack of social housing. And as the video mentioned, the refugees find themselves in a particularly difficult scenario as they aren't able to work whilst they're in the asylum process, which means that by the time they come out the system, they've got a lack of savings, will struggle to put down deposits, for example, don't have the kind of evidence that might be required to get deposits or to make kind of forward payments on rent. And for those reasons, they often face quite major barriers entering the private rented sector, at least immediately at that point of being given their decision and being asked to leave the accommodation. Another key reason that refugees specifically often face homelessness when they're granted status is because they're only given 28 days, a maximum of 28 days to find somewhere else to live. As has already been mentioned, we have seen for the first time people being given as little as 7 days notice. However, we expect the standard procedure to be 28 days. However, that is obviously still a very short window to find alternative housing, particularly for someone who might not be familiar with navigating the housing market in a language they're not familiar with. And it's also important to mention that 28 days is incompatible with the current universal credit process, which requires a waiting time of at least 5 weeks before a payment can be made. Another quite important thing to remember is that refugees won't immediately be eligible for council housing and emergency accommodation as well, unless they're in a priority need category. So most refugees, particularly those single males under the age of 35, will be reliant on one of 2 things to avoid rough sleeping when they receive that decision and when their asylum accommodation ends. So that will be either the support of friends and family, sofa surfing, for example. And a lot of people that approach our members for support will come from an informal arrangement like sofa surfing that's broken down, or they will already be reliant on the support of charities and the voluntary sector. And the Naccom network is made up exactly of organisations doing that. So as I mentioned, the main ways our members will typically support someone who has been experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness at the point of being granted refugee status will be either by facilitating hosting, alternatively by delivering a property or housing scheme, which is where they'll have access to a property that they may let out to somebody facing homelessness, or they'll deliver some other more short-term form of accommodation like a shelter, hostel, or a B&B. But the one I'll primarily talk about right now is hosting. So there's around 25 hosting schemes in the Naccom network operating all across the UK. That involves some of the largest organisations like Refugees at Home, which accept referrals from across the country, to much smaller projects facilitating local hosting schemes and networks, which include multiple faith-based and church-based organisations as well. So at Naccom, we really do believe that hosting plays a vital role in supporting people out of homelessness, particularly those that have been in the asylum system. We find that for refugees in particular, hosting gives shelter and stability at quite a chaotic time in their lives, that period of integration into wider society after leaving the asylum system. And it can be a really useful temporary stepping stone towards longer term accommodation. So if they're a refugee, someone with status, then hosting is a really great platform where someone's looking for jobs, looking at move on into longer term accommodation, perhaps applying for universal credit. It's a great platform to do that in. Or alternatively, there's someone who's been refused asylum. If they've received a negative decision, then in a hosting placement, they'll typically also be able to access wider support like legal advice, casework, to look at the legal options that they may have, whilst in the stability and security of the hosting household towards settling their status. And of course, hosts themselves are also provided with support as well by the organisation that's facilitating hosting placement. So we've published 3 toolkits on hosting, which serve as an introduction to hosting, which I'll circulate later, and I really encourage you to read if you are interested in potentially becoming a host. Now, unsurprisingly, in the current context, our hosting organisations have been overwhelmed by an unprecedented number of referrals for refugees needing to be hosted. Some of our members reporting figures like 5 and 6 times the regular number of monthly referrals that they would typically have. But fortunately, volunteers and people across the country have seen this need and opened up their homes to those in need. Something else we've seen grow in the past few months is the interest in lodging. So very similar to hosting, apart from it will involve some sort of rent or payment per se being collected. Lodging arrangements, of course, come at a cost to guests, unlike hosting, but they can have some other benefits as well to guests. We've found, or we've heard that, for example, having a lodging agreement and paying regular rent can be beneficial for someone further along down the line when they're asked for references when looking for properties in the private sector. And it can be also, a useful way of kind of familiarising yourself with renting and that kind of process in the UK as well. So there are several options if you were potentially interested in participating in a hosting scheme or promoting it, or if you're approached by someone who might benefit from being referred to support. Firstly, I'd say if you're in London, I'd recommend contacting Housing Justice, who have hosting and lodging within their services. If you're not in London, I'd recommend that you get in touch with us. So on our website, you can find a map of all of the schemes in the network, including the hosting schemes, and there may also be lodging schemes in your area as well, which will, of course, kind of signpost you towards. I'd also recommend getting in touch with Welcome Churches, one of our members, and again, we can signpost you towards those. So through their Welcome Homeless project, they connect potential hosts with refugees for short-term placements. And I believe there's around 1,000 churches in that network currently. And then aside from hosting, it's the second accommodation model I want to briefly talk about that we see within the network is that housing and property schemes. So this isn't as quick a solution as hosting is, and it does require consideration over a longer period of time. But it is, again, something that we've published some guides and toolkits on around getting started. And it essentially involves using a housing stock that you may have access to support people facing homelessness. So there's currently around 45 charities in our network that accommodate refugees and asylum seekers using some form of housing or property scheme model. And the fundamental idea is that a person or people will be accommodated, often in a shared house. There'll be some form of rent agreement, and the extent of the rent will probably be based on that person's status. But in most cases, whilst a person's in that accommodation, they'll also be supported by other types of support towards helping them towards move on. Again, whether that's into more long-term accommodation or alternative accommodation if they're a refugee, or perhaps back into the asylum system if there's someone who has been refused asylum or had a negative decision. So these properties may be properties that the charity owns outright. It might be properties that have been gifted to the charity by a landlord, or it might be properties that are managed on behalf of a housing association. But I think over a fifth of all properties in the network currently are provided by a church or other faith-based organisation. So they play a really vital role in supporting the housing stock within the network. And some examples of this are included in our toolkit. And that might include some of you here today, actually. So I guess if you happen to have potential housing stock that you think might be suited to this type of support, then again, we're very happy to talk through the potential options or put you in touch with others who are doing the same work. And I can share the toolkit as well. So that, just to finish, here is our members map. As you can see, we really do have organisations all over England, as well as in South Wales, and quite strong membership in Glasgow and Edinburgh as well. If you're interested in anything I've mentioned today, please do get in touch. So my contact details are on this final slide. I know my colleague Katie is here on this call, so between us, we'll be happy to answer any questions. But for now, I'll pass over to Bethan, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Oh, we still got your, there we go. There. Thank you, Leon. Yes, so I was asked if I could give people any practical tips about what to do for people in this situation. I I think generally my first response was, well, just run around shrieking, panic, 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 but that's not very practical. So possibly we need something else instead. I think the first thing to say is people have touched upon this, but this is not a new problem. We have always had high levels of homelessness amongst people who have recently been granted refugee status because they are in a very difficult situation. What's happened recently, as has been mentioned, is because of the streamlined asylum process that the Home Office has introduced to try and clear the backlog, we suddenly have a very large number of people who are finding themselves homeless after having been granted refugee status. And also a lot of them are in places where they might not have previously been, particularly large urban areas where there's already a shortage of affordable housing. So that actually makes things even worse potentially. So that's what the issue is. And then there's the question of, well, what can we actually do about it? Well, I wish I had some magic wand solutions. That would be very nice. But other than a reasonable Home Office or local authorities with lots of money, there aren't any magic wand solutions. We have managed to get some give from the Home Office, as has been mentioned. One thing has been, as has been said, that they have agreed that the 28-day notice period now starts from someone receiving their biometric card rather than getting a decision, which is a step forward. And the other thing that they have agreed to is that no one will be evicted from asylum accommodation when SWEP is in force, the Severe Weather Emergency Protocol. So again, that is something positive that has been gained from them by pressure from organisations like Housing Justice, like Naccom, like the Greater London Authority and people like that. So that's all good. But as has been said, even 28 days isn't really long enough. It's longer than 7 days. It's still not enough. There has been a lot of campaigning to try and get the Home Office to change it to 56 days, which would bring it in line with the Homelessness Reduction Act. But they say they can't do that without an act of Parliament. So that's probably not a goer just at the moment, not with our current government. So what else is possible? Well, ideally, if you do have contact with people who are still in the asylum system, then starting preparing them as early as possible for what they might face when they get out the other end, I think would be a good idea. If you don't, well, some of this might apply once they get their decision, but if you do get people at an earlier point, starting to talk to them about what might happen when they get their status, I think is key, because they need to understand that once they get their biometric card, the clock is ticking. They will have a limited period of time to get things sorted out. And unless they happen to be priority needs, so people with either children or people with quite substantial health issues or disabilities, then the local authority is not obliged to give them accommodation, and they're going to have to find some other options. I think it is important to encourage people to contact the local authority as soon as possible, even if they are not in priority need. The local authorities still do have obligations to help people look at their options under the Homelessness Reduction Act, so look at what is available. And quite a lot of local authorities have done some work to try and look at this situation and to try and put extra resources in place to help people. So we have seen local authorities who have now a private rented sector officer who's trying to help people to get into the private rented sector, who have set up small grant schemes to try and give people a little bit of money to get themselves sorted out initially, and who have done things like try to arrange help to get people employment ready. So, okay, they're not going to get accommodation immediately, but at least if they might start to find work, they might be in a better position a little bit further down the line, if they can possibly sofa serve till then. So there are things which local authorities can do, and people need to be encouraged to engage with them. Even if people are in priority need, or someone who might get an offer through the local authority managing to find them a hostel place of some kind, I think it's really important to manage expectations about what they may or may not get. People need to understand that they may be in temporary accommodation for quite a long period of time, and that temporary accommodation might not be great. But really importantly, they may need to understand that it's very unlikely to be in the area where they were being accommodated previously. And it's really key that they understand the consequences of refusing an offer of accommodation. Because if people refuse an offer of accommodation, they're not going to get another one. And this seems to be a kind of myth which goes round. People get told, you know, oh yeah, if you refuse it, they'll find you something nearer, they'll find you something better. They won't. And people really need to know that. So making that very clear, I think, is really important. There are things which people can do to try and help themselves as early as possible. So I would say one thing is trying to open a bank account sooner rather than later, if at all possible, so that they can get things moving quickly. People can open a bank account while they're still in the asylum system. If they've got that, that might make the universal credit application go a little bit more smoothly. They could wait until they get their status, but when you've got so many other things to do, if you can get it off your chest now and get a bank account opened, then that's a good thing to do if you possibly can. You can do it with an ARC card, and then often banks will ask for something like a letter on headed paper from some kind of charity to prove your address or something like that. So it is possible. Some banks are better than others. Some of the online banks, I'm told, are quite flexible in terms of opening accounts. So do try and help people to do that as soon as possible. And then there's the universal credit application. So applying for universal credit as quickly as people can, because we all know there's long delays. We all know it's going to take time. So the sooner people can do it, the better. They may have problems accessing the internet. They may not have computers. They're likely to be doing a lot over the phone. So if you have facilities where you can help them, help support them if they have language difficulties, that can be good. But also, as far as I'm aware, Citizens Advice still have funding to help people to make universal credit applications. So if you do have a local Citizens Advice office near you, then it's probably a good idea to talk to them about how you can refer people and how they can help people as quickly as possible. So that's a good thing to do, possibly, around that. As I've said, lots of local authorities have put things into effect. I know of at least one local authority which now has a seconded housing officer going around and talking to people in hotels about what they can expect and how to navigate the housing system. So that's a good thing. If people aren't registered with GPs and they do have health problems, well, making sure that they are registered so they do have evidence of their health problems and may stand then perhaps some chance of being in priority need is a good thing too. So making sure people are registered with GPs, that any health issues are documented and they're getting treatment for that can be helpful too, just in trying to get a few more people off the list of people who might be in need of housing. Other than that, there are things like I have known some local authorities use discretionary housing payments as rent deposits or rent up front in some cases. So that might be a possibility for people in some cases. But again, talk to your local authorities. In fact, harass your local authorities or schmooze your local authorities or do whatever you can with your local authorities to try and make sure that they are aware of this issue and are reacting to it. And then the one other thing which is worth mentioning, although again, it's not a great measure, is the refugee resettlement loan, which again is far from perfect. You can only get between £100 and £500, and it is slow to come through, so it takes time. But again, if people can find temporary measures, night shelters, sofa surfing and things in the interim, then by the time the refugee integration loan comes through, it's possible that that can go towards a rent deposit or rent in advance or things like that as well. So it is worth doing and worth doing early. Leon's mentioned lots of different ways your organisation can potentially look at ways of providing accommodation, whether that be through hosting, through members of your congregation or people who volunteer with you, or if you have any housing stock available. None of us come from big organisations with lots of money and lots of resources, or if you do, please do feel free to get in touch afterwards. But, you know, everyone can do something, even if it's something small. And if we all do as much as we can, then hopefully we can take the edge off this and get the most vulnerable people into accommodation and keep people off the street as much as possible. There isn't an awful lot else I can say in terms of practical tips, but I would just say, as I say, keep the pressure on policy-wise. Do keep talking to organisations like Housing Justice, like Compassionate Communities, like your local authority, any other campaigning organisations that you're working with, in order to make sure that they are aware of the problem. Talk to your local MP. Keep talking to local and national press if you have inroads into them as well, because only by raising awareness and keeping up this work can we do this. The gov.uk website, if you look at the Refugee Resettlement Integration Loan, Angie, look there and you'll find the details there. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bethan. And you managed to answer questions straight away. That's pretty cool. Okay, so should we go to Jenna, who's going to tell? So there's like the Leon kind of hinted at about lodging and hosting schemes, and Jenna is going to talk to us more about hosting and lodging schemes. Or in fact, I think mainly about a lodging scheme. Is that right?
Hello, everybody. Oh, bear with me. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, guys. So, oh, there we go. So yeah, it's lovely to see everyone here tonight. I'm Jenna and I oversee the migrant homelessness projects at Housing Justice. It's been really interesting and useful to hear from everybody else this evening that sort of outlined and give details about what is like a really worrying situation for refugees at this time. You know, it just doesn't make sense that the government, the Home Office, you know, are offering someone safety here and then setting them up to fail by not providing adequate time and support for them to integrate properly. But in the spirit of optimism, I'm going to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes talking about some of the tangible solutions that you can consider for supporting our refugee and asylum seeking friends. And as Jacob said, yeah, I'm going to build a bit on what Leon was saying about hosting and lodgings, with specific reference to the work that we do at Housing Justice here in London. So yeah, the projects are London based. Housing Justice does also run a hosting scheme in Wales. If you want to know more about that, you can look on the website. The information here might apply directly to you if you've got a spare room and you're considering using it to help somebody out of homelessness. Or it may be that you think your church communities, your parishes, your congregations, your community groups might be interested in setting up hosting or being host, sorry. So it might be that you want to spread this information in the communities, and we'd be happy to arrange bespoke events for your communities as well that talks about this in a bit more detail. So reach out to me after this if that's something that you think is worthwhile. Yeah, so whenever I sort of speak about hosting, I like to think about our mission as an organisation at Housing Justice. Our mission is to mobilise Christian action on homelessness and housing needs through love, justice, advocacy and nurture. And our vision is of a society where everyone has access to a home that truly meets their needs, which means a secure and genuinely affordable home in a neighbourhood where an individual can access work and services that enable them to flourish. So I think, you know, the work that we do around hosting asylum seekers and refugees resonates really deeply with our mission and our vision. And I think, you know, it's helpful if we sort of reflect on that as we're thinking more about hosting. So we've been running a hosting project since 2015. It was set up as a grassroots response to what was then called the European migrant crisis, which was triggered by the war in Syria. And at that time, organisations such as Housing Justice, Naccom, Praxis, we were all sort of inundated with calls from concerned citizens, people who had spare rooms and wanted to do something to help. And then since then, it was almost 10 years, our hosts have provided over 50,000 nights of safe accommodation, and that also includes at least 17 clergy members that have opened up their homes. And actually, the number is more than 50,000 because these stats are from 2019. So, you know, it's a huge impact. And we've supported people from over 20 different countries. You'll notice that more than 60% of our guests have been female, women. So it's not necessarily representative of the wider asylum seeker and refugee population, but it does reflect the extent of migrant homelessness in London. Many of these women have been in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s. We've currently got 15 guests hosted in households across 11 boroughs. It's actually soon to be increased to 19. So we've seen an influx of new referrals at the moment. So at Housing Justice, we're very proud of the way that we proactively respond to need. Just as we did back in 2015, we mobilised the grassroots response with hosting. We're now actively responding to the rise in refugee homelessness. We've just, like, in the last month, launched a new refugee lodgings project, which is in partnership with the GLA and London councils, and it's specifically aimed at providing safe and stable accommodation to newly granted refugees at risk of rough sleeping after being evicted from their home office accommodation. And in addition to helping refugees, it also actually helps Londoners in an additional income to help with the cost of living crisis, which is obviously affecting us all. So there's, as Leon touched on, there are some key differences between hosting and refugee lodgings. The main one is that the people who signed up for refugee lodgings, that we call resident landlords, they receive a monthly income from the spare room, which is paid directly to them by the refugee lodger. Whereas our hosts are volunteers, completely volunteer basis, and they don't receive any financial support for their spare room. And the reason for this difference is that the people that are supported by our hosting project are people who still have ongoing cases with the Home Office, which means that they're not eligible to work, they're not able to access benefits, and are actually traditionally some of the most vulnerable people in our society, because they're often trapped in a cycle of destitution, homelessness, being forced to rely on the goodwill of charity, friends. And so we provide our guests in the hosting project with a destitution payment of £150 a month, which isn't much, but it does help them to get their essential items that they need. And, you know, without the kindness and generosity of our hosts, our guests would have little to no options other than rough sleeping or potentially other sort of very exploitative situations. And so, you know, the goal for our guests in hosting is yet to get their status from the Home Office. But as we're seeing now, that then presents a new set of challenges, a new set of problems with accessing housing. So even though newly granted refugees can work, they can access benefits, so they have the means to pay rent, there's, you know, a whole set of barriers that Bethan and everyone's sort of outlined. Being able to find work, affordable housing, integration issues, and especially if you've been sort of living in a hotel that that's all you've known since you arrived in the UK, and then being told at very short notice that you have to leave. It's really scary, sort of awful position to be in. So our hopes for the lodgings project is that a 6 months lodging placement will provide safety, and a bit of stability and support to help people overcome these barriers and to equip them to then be able to move on with the support of Housing Justice, with the support of their resident landlords, to move on sustainably into their own accommodation after 6 months. And so whether somebody signs up as a host or a resident landlord is very much dependent on their personal circumstances and possibly their beliefs. But what both can rely on from Housing Justice is robust support. We're here every step of the way as your journey as a host or a resident landlord. And in the initial stage, that includes we come and see you at home and assess your home, health and safety, safeguarding checks, look at your reasons for hosting. Have you really considered this? Is this suitable for your current circumstances? We do DBS checks and references, and we provide an induction and training program and handbook for both our hosts and our resident landlords. So to help you feel equipped and ready for the experience, which is ultimately going to be then beneficial for your guest as well. We've then got our matching process. So everybody that's referred into the projects have been fully risk assessed and referred to us by professional caseworkers. We then have a sort of staggered matching process, which starts with an intro Zoom, and then we accompany individuals to the host household or the landlord's household, have a look at the rooms and talk through a formal agreement. So the aim of that is to make sure that everybody's got an informed decision. Everybody is aware of what they're signing up to. We try and match people according to preferences as best as we can. But yeah, we take a really proactive approach to making sure that it's a suitable arrangement for everybody. We don't want to set people up to fail. We want to set everybody up on the right foot. And then during placements, there's a full package of support both for the hosts and the resident landlords and for our guests. So for the people who are opening their homes, they have access to reflective practice with external facilitators. There's peer support from the network of hosts, so people with shared experiences. We have social events, regular supervision sessions, one-to-one check-ins with our hosts and resident landlords, and then also regular reviews of placements, mediation if needed, if there are any issues, which involves everybody involved. And it's very person-centered approach to resolving any issues and just making sure that it's a sustainable and positive experience for everybody. So right, I'm going to play a short video now, which I think demonstrates the powerful impact that opening your home can have. Hopefully it's going to go.
My name's Aidan, and I've been hosting with Housing Justice since 2016. I've got a 3-bedroom flat, and I was happy to offer the smallest of those 3 bedrooms to somebody if there's somebody who needed it.
My name is Ephraim, and I'm from Eritrea. Staying here was a good time for me, and it's really helpful for my life.
I think the biggest thing that impressed me about Ephraim, and really that I took from the time he was with me, was how to be resilient in a really difficult time in his life.
The situation in Eritrea is bad. If you are a politician or if you are Christian, you put you in prison. So it's very difficult to do. I feel like I start my life as a new chapter.
I remember Ephraim had his 30th birthday whilst he was living here, and so we had a day out down at the coast of Brighton.
I was in the night shelter. It's called C4WS. They told me when the night shelters become closed, they recommended me to go to house in justice.
I learned a great deal from a personal point of view about interacting with somebody who's completely new to me, from a different culture.
Now I live in my own place. I got 1-bedroom flat. I was working gardening job, and now I'm looking for another job as well. And I want to study for the future as well.
So if somebody's thinking of becoming a host, please do contact Housing Justice via the website. You can do it as soon as possible, because I know at the moment there is a growing need, in fact, for hosts. So I'd say do contact the hosting manager and put your name forward, have a chat with them about it, and probably they'll put you in touch with people like me who've done it before, so can talk through more of the specifics of it.
So yeah, you really can't underestimate the sort of transformative effect that having a safe and stable place to stay can have on someone's life. When you're able to meet your basic needs, you've got somewhere to wash your clothes, you've got somewhere to wash yourself, somewhere to cook your own food, somewhere to sleep safely at night with the door closed. That then gives people the time and better mental capacity to help them heal from the past traumas that they've been through, but also to start making plans for the future. So obviously encouraging everybody to sign up host. It's really, really rewarding experience for you as hosts. Actually, one of our hosts is here tonight, which is great. And yeah, you can check out our website. And yeah, if you would like us to arrange an event with your church, give me a shout and be happy to do that. We can do it online event or in person. So yeah.
Thanks, Jenna. The world tells you that a Manchester City fan from South London and an Eritrean man from Tigray province should not get on and have nothing, because they have nothing in common. And if you know everything that's going on in the world right now, you'd think that can't possibly work. And then you hear great stories like Aidan and Ephraim's, and you think there is people's common humanity is a beautiful and important thing. So thank you everybody for your thank you to the people who presented for your presentations. There was one question, and Bethan ruined it for us all by answering it straight away. So there was no so we've got nothing to build up to. If you've got more questions, if you use the next kind of couple of minutes to pass them in. What are the tax implications for resident landlords? Jenna, it's your specialist subject, because we only learned about it about 2-3 weeks ago or something. Over to you.
Yeah, so you can earn up to £7,500 tax-free per year from your rental income. And if it's over than that, you will need to pay tax on your income. There is a government rent-a-room scheme that you can register with that helps you to manage that. And it's, yeah, it provides more sort of detailed information on that. So
I think legally we have to say something like this does not constitute financial advice or something like that, but there you go. Okay, yeah, any more questions if we post them in the chat? Couple of just kind of reflections and things to maybe just push around for kind of 5 minutes or so, and then we can all get off to watch Bristol City against West Ham in the FA Cup replay. So first thing is, this probably isn't going away anytime soon, actually, and potentially gets a little bit worse as we get to the spring, because I know I had a quick look at who was registered, and I see a couple of colleagues from or friends, in fact, from night shelters are on. And obviously we have a lot, particularly in London, but elsewhere as well. I know Nottingham, Emmanuel House are on from Nottingham. We've got lots of people in night shelters who are from who have left home office accommodation. So we kind of like, it's great that we got people off, we avoided people going to the street, but obviously that big job of moving people on, which is very tough, is in some cases being kind of put off till the kind of spring. So we've got a big job to do there. So we have had one from Sean around household insurance implications, which Jenna, or actually for hosting, Jenna and maybe Leon as well. I suppose this has got to be one for the two of you, right?
Yeah, well, the advice is always check with your insurance policy provider first before hosting. Some policies might specifically have a line about it, which might cause a problem for your insurance. But yeah, you should always check. And sort of, yeah, I don't know if Leon or Katie might have something they want to add on that.
Yeah, if Katie is happy to answer that, I'll pass over to her. I'm sure we can follow it up if not.
Yeah, I mean, I would exactly what Jenna has said. You have to contact your household insurance companies and ask them. What we did hear around the time of the Homes for Ukraine is that some insurance companies were actually putting people's insurance premiums up, or there was some kind of discrimination that was kind of coming out between hosting and hosting for Ukraine's. And so we've done some work on that with Naccom, speaking to kind of the Insurance Federation people. I'll try and find the blog or the kind of news kind of resource that we sent out about that. Basically, we got them to, stop doing that, basically. And it isn't right that somebody refuses your insurance, your hosting. I think it was to do with kind of time limits, etc. So yeah, I would definitely speak to your insurance company, but we would always say if you host through an organisation like Housing Justice, they'll support you in that and make sure that you've got all the right information.
We are, in fact, the insurance industry has obviously had lots of dialogue from us recently, our respective organisations, because we're also about to publish a list of insurance providers for night shelters as well. So yeah, so there you go. Great. So last call for questions. And in the meantime, I'll just do a brief recap, I think, of some of the bits that we've heard. So we've heard a lot about lodging and hosting, and obviously Jenna and colleagues from Naccom are keen to chat to you about that if it's of interest, or if you want to act as a messenger to other people and then direct them to either organisation. We welcome that and in fact encourage it. If you're from a church, Bethan, go on. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I just wanted to say something quickly in relation to the kind of hosting stuff, just based upon the slides that Jenna shared. And one thing I wanted to say was, I really think we need to push to overcome this reluctance to host men. The vast majority of people who are in need of hosting are men, young men, and I think there's this huge reticence, I couldn't possibly have a man in my house. They're young men, they're not monsters from outer space, they're just young men like any other young men, and I think we really need to push to get over this kind of reluctance to host young men. There we are, just my thought.
Very true, and well put. Right, so we've heard about that this is going to be around for a while, so we're going to have to work out some strategies to deal with it. I'm going to take that question in 2 seconds. We have heard about the importance of, particularly if you're a church or you're a non-professionalised homelessness organisation working with people in this area, the importance of signposting to professional advice and services, including and importantly the local authority, not assuming that somebody doesn't have that the local authority doesn't have a GC-SAT person, and even if they don't, there may be important signposting advice the local authority can give. We have heard about the importance of having strong links with organisations like the CAB, who are going to be really important for a lot of people leaving home office accommodation. We have heard about we actually haven't spoken about we've spoken about the need to manage expectations a bit for people as to what accommodation they're likely to end up in. We haven't spoken very much about people probably going to have to move around a little bit, whether that's within London, maybe out of zone 1, and even out of London in some cases, unfortunately. Sadly, part of the simulation into British society is working out how terrible our housing crisis is. And we've heard about the importance of like getting a, working towards a longer term fix, might be a wrong word, but a longer term solution, which is a policy solution. We are, I'm always quite open at Housing Justice about saying this is a complete sticking plaster, not a long term solution. Long term solution is a policy solution and needs some work. Fortunately, there are at least two sets of elections this year, mayoral elections in London and elsewhere, and obviously almost certainly a general election. So lots of things to talk to candidates about. Final question is from Sean. Is there any reliable estimate as to the current length of time for an asylum seeker application to be considered? Bethan.
That very much depends on when you made your application and whether you're one of the countries which is subject to the streamlined asylum process or not. Essentially, we have a number of different criteria at the moment which will determine how long your asylum application takes. So if you are someone who made an asylum application before the 28th of June 2022, you are quite possibly in the streamlined asylum process where they're trying to get your application through as quickly as possible. And so you might get a decision relatively quickly, hopefully within the next 6 months or so. If you are someone who made your application after the 28th of June 2022 and before March 2023, you might be in the next lot of people to be looked at potentially, depending on what the government decides to do with that cohort of people. If you made your application after March 2023, goodness only knows, quite frankly, because they're still looking at introducing some provisions around the illegal migration bill, which could mean that people in that cohort have their asylum applications left almost indefinitely, depending on what happens with that particular bill. So there is no straightforward answer on that at all, really.
All sounds so simple.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Emma, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to quickly add, I just remembered something that me and Patty were discussing when we were talking about running this, and it's also to make sure that you take care of yourself and your teams, that the mental load of helping people who have experienced trauma themselves is quite a lot, and it can be very heavy. So it's also really important to make use of your communities and your local outreach, but also to take care of yourself throughout this. Yeah.
Great, good point. Okay, I think we've probably arrived at the end of this webinar. Do get in touch if there's anything that any of the speakers have raised that you want to take further, if there's any of the things that have been spoken about which you want to explore a bit, and also get the message out and speak to others who might be interested in hosting or lodging or whatever it is. We're keen to hear from you. I know the other organisations are too. I never do this, but I thought because it's after hours and I just felt like it was the right thing to do. I thought I'd end with a prayer, and I know, and I've been reading the Psalter. One of my New Year's resolutions is to read the Psalms, and the final bit of Psalm 9 is that, Lord, you hear the prayer of the poor, you strengthen their hearts, you turn your ear to protect the rights of the orphan and oppressed, so that mortal man may strike terror no more. And we leave, and I thought that was a nice way to leave it tonight, but this is a very difficult and probably the challenge of our times, how we deal with migration in a world which is much smaller than it was even in the beginning of my lifetime. So we ask for your guidance and your intervention, Lord, because prayer is powerful. Amen. Go well. See you soon. We will put the webinar up online. Do speak to us about things that we can do to help you, help other people. Good night. God bless. Enjoy the football.
Thank you all.